Thank you, everyone. I think we're ready to begin the evening. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming in. And first things first, if you could take out your equivalent of this, and please disconnect it from networks and ringing sounds for the next hour, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. My name is Steele. I direct the Architectural Association in this AA school. It's a real honor and pleasure this evening to welcome to the AA for his first ever lecture, Jeremy Rifkin, who is in Europe right now and presenting a newly published book, which we of course have, and many of you will have already seen in the back room there, The Third Industrial Revolution, How Lateral Power is Transforming Energy, the Economy, and the World. And that title, of course, will be the topic for Jeremy's lecture this evening. And I think following a stunning week of European news and tabloid headlines that suggests in coming days we may be once again carrying German marks, Greek drachmas, or English sixpence, I think Jeremy's first ever visit here is remarkably well timed for the ways in which it will address the larger context and convolutions of Europe today. And first, let me just introduce Jeremy. I think as many of you know, he's a very rare kind of architect lecturing at an architectural association. Jeremy, in fact, is the architect of policies and not just the developer of ideas and ways of thinking. And in fact, his fashioning of policies relate directly to his topic this evening. Most notably, the Third Industrial Revolution, which is, of course, a long-term sustainability plan crafted over many years by him, working with many governments throughout Europe, which has as its purpose the management, the sustainable management of the energy resources and technologies and cultural life of Europe itself. It is a plan that was agreed to and formally endorsed by the European Parliament in 2007, and is a plan that's currently being implemented by agencies within the European Commission, as well as 27 member states of Europe today. It is, needless to say, a very big deal, and not just for its ambition, which is to put energy at the heart of Europe's definition of itself in the 21st century, but of course for the fact that the European economy today is dominating global economies in startling and unexpected ways. Jeremy's book develops themes that have long been a part of his life and work. He is the author of more than 20 books, examining nearly every aspect and every facet of late 20th and early 21st century economies. His interest in and analysis of new technologies, especially biotechnologies, life sciences, and the environment has, since the 1970s, put his life's work at the absolute center of contemporary economic, political, and increasingly cultural life. His books include his 1975 Beyond Corporate Culture, the Green Lifestyle Handbook of 1990. Corporate Culture, by the way, was published at the outset of his career in 1975. He's the author of many books on everything from the petrochemical economies that are fading in front of us today to his 1992 Beyond Beef, The Rise and Fall of Cattle Culture, which for someone that comes from Idaho is a book I've always taken close to heart. His 1995 book, The End of Work, is one that I think many of you know for the ways in which it sat at the center of debates about the corporate restructuring of multinational companies. It is a topic that was important when the book came out 15 years ago. It's a topic that, of course, is only more important and more urgent today. And it's a book that I, the year after setting up the DRL studio here, assigned in a seminar, and one of my Korean students at the time looked at the title and asked if that meant he could take the rest of the term off from his studies. Last summer at Enric's recommendation, while we and many of us at the AA were at the Venice Architecture Biennale, I had the pleasure of downloading and reading overnight the Empathic Civilization book that he published in 2010. The Empathic Civilization is a sustained treatise on the potentials of a world that's undeniably connected in forms of culture, commerce, and many other conditions, which I think puts him at the center of debates about globalizing economies everywhere. Jeremy trained and did his undergraduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania in economics. He went on to complete a master's degree in international affairs at Tufts University, and soon thereafter, with Ted Howard in the late 1970s, created his Foundation of Economic Trends, which is still active today in national and international public policy debate. In the late 1980s, and literally years ahead of the rest of the world, Jeremy and his collaborators brought together climate scientists and environmental activists from 35 countries and created the first global greenhouse network, which had a profound impact on the discussion and debate worldwide of environmental conditions in the late 20th century. As I've already said, his writings, ideas, and thinking continue to directly influence the shaping of not just the EU, but many other policies today in the world. He has served as an advisor to not only the EU Parliament and the European Commission. He has advised Chancellor Merkel in Germany, President Sarkozy in France, and other European leaders during their presidencies in the European Council. And I think the final point I would make by way of introduction is that what makes Jeremy's visit today a wonderful one for us here at the AA isn't just his accomplishments, but of course I think something you could say modestly is our own accomplishment, which is to remind everyone of the AA's own founding during a moment and in the exact space of the first great industrial revolution in the world in the middle of the 19th century in England, and a brilliant generation of young thinkers and ambitious architects who founded the AA in 1847 and who within a few years of its founding invited individuals like John Ruskin to stand before audiences like this and lecture on the unexpected consequences of industrialization and the role that architects, artists, and creative individuals everywhere need to remember when they confront the realities of an industrial world. Tonight's lecture by Jeremy will be an opportunity for us to revisit our own roots and not just see his latest work. It will be followed, as you all know, by a short presentation by Enric Ruiz Geli, who we have to thank immensely as a collaborator of Jeremy's who has brought him here for tonight's event. To thank Enric, Edouard Cabet, Julian Wolf, and the students of Diploma 18, whose work is currently projected, I think, on the building outside, which we will all go out and visit on completion of Jeremy's lecture tonight. Everyone, Jeremy Rifkin.
When you get older, it takes longer to prepare. Have you noticed this? This will happen to everyone here. Thanks for being here tonight. I want to start on a somber note. I hope it'll end up being a liberating reflection. We've had two events in the past 2 years, 3 years, which I believe signals the end game for the great industrial revolution based on fossil fuels. First event was July 2008. You recall that month. That was an interesting month. Oil prices hit $147 a barrel on world markets. And the prices for everything else went through the roof. And the reason that's happened is because this whole civilization is built off carbon deposits. It's not just the petrol. We grow our food in petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides. Virtually all of our pharmaceutical products, with a few exceptions, are still petrochemical based. All of our construction materials, which you know, are petrochemical based, from plastic to cements. Our synthetic fiber, our power, our transport, our heat and light, it's all made out of the carbon deposits of a previous period in history. So in 2007, when crude oil prices started to go over 80 a barrel, all the other prices went up on the supply chain. At 120 a barrel, we had food riots, 22 countries, because the price of wheat, barley, rye, and rice were doubling and trebling. And we've got 40% of the human race tonight living on $2 a day or less. And when those basic commodity prices rose, we had 1 billion people in harm's way, according to the UN, facing potential starvation. At 147 a barrel, everyone stopped buying. The whole economic engine of the Industrial Revolution shut down that month. What I want to suggest to you is that that was the great economic earthquake, signaling the beginning of the end of the industrial age based on fossil fuels. The collapse of the financial markets 60 days later, that was the aftershock. World leaders, even the ones I'm advising, they're still dealing with the aftershock. They haven't gotten to the earthquake. So therefore, they don't have a good roadmap as to where we are and where we need to go. We've hit peak globalization based on an industrial mindset in fossil fuels. It's about 147 a barrel. This is an endgame. The reason we're in this endgame is because of 2 milestones. Peak oil per capita, which we reached in 1979, and now global peak oil production, which we reached in 2006. In 1979, and we distributed all the crude oil that was available at that point to everyone alive on the planet at that moment. That would be the most oil everyone could have if we shared it. We found more crude oil since then, but population rose quicker. So if we distributed all the crude oil we have today to 7 billion people, there's just less to go around. The second milestone, global peak oil production. Now, a lot of you are familiar with that. It's been controversial. The optimists thinking, well, maybe we'll peak around mid-30s. The pessimists saying maybe we've already peaked. Global peak oil production is when half the crude oil is used up on the Hubert bell curve in geology. When half that oil is used up and you're at the top of the bell curve, it is over because you can't afford the price after that. Well, the International Energy Agency, which is the authoritative body we rely on, they dropped a bombshell last December in their 2011 energy report. They said it looks like we peaked on crude oil in 2006 at 70 million barrels a day. And we're going to drop down to 69 million barrels of crude oil a day over the next 20 years. But listen to this. It's going to cost us $7 trillion to get the remaining oil out. We have other fossil fuels. There's tar sands from Canada, heavy oil in Venezuela, there's shale gas, and there's coal. But they're dirtier. They emit more CO2. What I'm suggesting to you is every time we try to regrow this global economy at the same rate we were growing before July 2008, all prices shoot up, all the other prices shoot up, purchasing power shoots down, the economy collapses. And that's because China and India brought in 1/3 of the human race to the game at a 10, 12% growth rate in the last 12 years. Just too much aggregate human demand against crude oil. In 2009, crude oil went down to 30 a barrel because there was no economic activity in the world. It stopped. As soon as we started replenishing inventory in 2010, started to try to get the engine going, oil prices shot up to 110 a barrel. Well, I don't know what they are tonight, probably about 110, 115. All the other prices are going up now, and guess what's happening? Purchasing power is going down, and we're headed to a second collapse of the global economy. This is an end game. We're going to see short cycles of 3 to 4 years. Try to start the engine, replenish the inventory, collapse. Try to start the engine, replenish the inventory, collapse. Or go to the dirtier fuels, but that's still going to get us too high because all the prices of those fuels are more expensive. Now you see why world leaders don't want to deal with this. This is an end game. The second event of the last 3 years, Copenhagen, 2009, December. Our world leaders come together to deal with the entropy bill for the industrial age. Now, this is not a metaphor. Do we have anybody with an engineering background? You study thermodynamics here, correct? Yep. You all study thermodynamics? Well, you know you cannot escape the second law of thermodynamics. It's the entropy bill. This is not a metaphor. We spewed massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to propel the carbon-based first and second industrial revolution. Now that atmosphere is so thick with CO2 and industrial-induced methane and nitrous oxide that we simply can't get enough of the sun's heat back off the planet. It's as simple and complicated as that. How bad is it? It's much worse than you're being told. Our scientists on the fourth assessment report of the UN panel on climate change gave us a middle scenario of a 3 degrees Celsius rise in temperature on this century from industrial-induced climate change gases. Now that's looking optimistic. But let me put this in perspective for the young students here. If we only go up 3 degrees in your century and your kids, that puts us back to the temperature on Earth 3 million years ago in the Pliocene. Completely different ecosystem dynamics. It's all about the hydrological cycle. That's why we want to think architecture from here on in. For every 1 degree that the planet's temperature goes up, the atmosphere absorbs 7% more precipitation from the ground. It just sucks it up. That means the entire hydrological cycle, the water cycle of the whole biosphere of the Earth, is disrupted in a very short period of time. Ecosystems can't catch up with a radical change in the hydrological cycle. More floods, more droughts, more tsunamis, more hurricanes, faster melt-offs in the Arctic. The whole water cycle is thrown off. And that's why our scientists say we are now in the early stages of the 6th mass extinction event of the last 450 million years. We've had 5 extinction waves in the last 500 million years. Every time we had a mass extinction, it comes quick. The chemistry of the planet shifts, quick extinction. It takes 10 million years to recover the biodiversity we lost every time there's an extinction event. As my wife says, we're not grasping the enormity of this moment. You know, we're the youngest species. We've been here only 175,000 years. We're the babies here. Now we're on the convergence of a second extinction event. We're already there. And our scientists tell us we could see at the upper end a 70% wipeout of all plant and animal life by the time this century turns. That's you and your kids. Unless we think that this is an academic issue, it's all about sustainability. You know, you use that term all the time here. But what does real sustainability mean? The primary economy of the Earth is photosynthesis. I teach at the Wharton School, been there forever. We teach business leaders. They come in and I ask them, what's the primary economy? They don't know because they never studied thermodynamics. Primary economy of the Earth is photosynthesis. We humans, 7 billion of us, only represent 0.5% of the living biomass on the Earth. You got it? We're now using 31% of the net production of photosynthesis on this small planet, and we're going to 10 billion people. Did you hear that stat? This is going to break. This is not sustainable by any standards. It's going to be up to the architects in this room and around the world to rethink our living habitats, our relationship to nature and the biosphere we live in quickly. So, despite the fact that climate change now threatens life on this planet, imperils our own species, disrupts our ecosystems, our world leaders couldn't cut the deal in Copenhagen. They're yelling and screaming at each other, walking in each other's meetings. It was the most disgraceful event I've ever seen. And they walked away without a deal. So what do? We've got peak globalization at 147 a barrel, a long end game. We try to regrow the economy, collapse, regrow the economy, collapse. We got millions of people out of work. We got an economy that's stalled. And now we've got real-time climate change impacting agriculture and infrastructure all over the world. So what do? We need a new economic vision. It has to be compelling and deliverable. We need a new economic game plan to go with the vision, and it has to move as quickly in the developing world as the developed world. We have to move off all carbon-based energies by 2040. That's in less than 30 years. How do we do it? We step back and we ask, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur? Because if we know how they occur, it gives us a roadmap of where we need to go. The great economic revolutions in history occur when 2 things happen. First, we change the energy regimes, and we've had many energy regimes over history. New energy regimes allow us to have a greater flow of energy, and that energy is like the blood of an organism. That energy allows us to create more complex social organization. We can annihilate time and space, bring more people together. differentiate skills, integrate all those differentiated skills into more complex economic and social units. But when we create these new energy regimes and they make possible more complex civilizations, they require communication revolutions that are agile enough to manage them. The great economic changes in history occur when energy revolutions converge and merge with communication revolutions. They change gestalt. They change temporal spatial orientation. They change the economic paradigm, and they change consciousness. Let me give you some examples. Forager-hunter societies. For 94% of our time here on this planet, we were foraging and hunting. More foraging, very little hunting. Every forager-hunter, the energy regime was the human body, because we hadn't domesticated animals for power sources. And every forager-hunter society in history, their communication was language, oral language, to forage, hunt, and groom for social life. Every forager-hunter society in history that we know of, even the ones today that still are around, they have mythological consciousness. Their brain is wired for mythological thinking. And the basic human drive, and let me go into what the basic human drive is. For 2 centuries, we were under the misguided conception, the Enlightenment conception, that the basic human drive is, as our Enlightenment philosophers said. Now, before that time, let me go back. The church was very clear about the basic human drive for 1,500 years. The church was very simple on this. You're born in sin, little babies are depraved, and we have to wait for salvation in the next world with Christ. End of story. Started with the fall and the Adam and Eve in the garden. Enlightenment philosophers said, no, we don't buy that. John Locke said, every little baby is born tabula rasa. What you put into them, you get out of them. But he left a little bit of an opening. He said, there is, however, a proclivity biologically to want to be productive and acquire property. And someone should have caught him on that. All right? I mean, Adam Smith said every little baby is born with a drive to be autonomous and seek self-interest in the marketplace. Post-Enlightenment philosopher Jeremy Bentham said every little baby is born to seek pleasure over pain. We are basically utilitarian by nature. Charles Darwin, the British naturalist, said every little baby, every creature is born with a drive to reproduce themselves. And then Sigmund Freud ended up the 19th century post-Enlightenment by saying, you know, actually every little baby is born with an insatiable sexual appetite, and all of life is about extinguishing libido. Now, please. Do we have any parents here yet? Anyone have babies in here? This little baby coming out of the womb. So Thomas Hobbes right that we are nasty, brutal, predatory species. And all the Enlightenment philosophers are right that we seek property, we want to be autonomous, we seek pleasure over pain, we only want to reproduce ourselves, and the bottom line is our insatiable sexual appetites. If that's it, we're doomed. That's it, little babies got that wired in, we're gone. I don't see how 7 billion people are going to come together as an extended human family and reconnect with the biosphere if we are predatory, competitive, utilitarian, pleasure-seeking, autonomous-driven, sexually depraved species. What our scientists are learning in the last 20 years, the Enlightenment philosophers got this one wrong. We're now realizing we are the most social of creatures. We have the biggest neocortex. Primates are very social, elephants, a lot of mammals. We're the most social, we have the biggest neocortex, and we've now actually discovered that our neural circuitry is wired not for depravity and competitiveness and predatory behavior. Those are secondary drives. We're actually wired for empathic distress. It's how we construct our social relationships as a social creature. So, for example, if a spider goes up your arm and I'm watching you, I'll go like this. I'll feel it's going up my arm, right? If you bleed, I'll wince. Crocodiles don't do this as far as we know. Some mammals do. We're wired with mirror neurons and with a whole circuitry that allows us to actually physically feel another as if their experience was our own. It's physical. So for forager hunters, their empathic distress only extended to the outer temporal spatial limits of their foraging hunting society and their oral culture, which is their own tribe, blood ties. If you were another tribe in another valley, you were a demon, non-human. The great hydraulic civilizations, beginning in Sumeria, the Mesopotamians, they created centralized canal-driven irrigation agriculture. They captured the sun in photosynthesis in cereal grains, barley, wheat, and rye. The stored sun in that grain was energy. Very complicated. They had to build canals, indenture thousands of workers, set up royal granaries, royal roads, coinage, urban life. It was so darn complicated, they had to create a communication revolution to manage the complexities of these centralized energy regimes. They created cuneiform in Samaria. And everywhere you see these great hydraulic civilizations, the Middle East, the Indus Valley of India, the Yangtze in China, Mexico, and this is amazing. Independently, people figure out some form of writing to manage it, not knowing it was created somewhere else. That's amazing. And the basic empathic drive extended to a new fictional family, religious ties. All the great religions were formed then. I'm Jewish, we are the people of the book. Buddhism, based on script. So we went from mythological to theological consciousness during the hydraulic civilizations, and the empathic drive extended to a fictional family. Now all Jews think of other Jews as brothers and sisters. It's not blood related, but allows us to extend the sociability so that we can feel another as ourselves in bigger units because we're in bigger temporal spatial context. First generation Rome, first generation Christians in Rome, amazing. Here are freedmen and women from around the empire, and they start kissing each other in the face and calling each other brother and sister. Do you know how weird that was? They weren't blood related, but they empathized Christian to Christian. 19th century, another convergence of communication energy. The print technology revolution became very cheap. We introduced rotary and linotype steam power printing. So we reduced the transaction cost. Then we introduced public schools in Europe and America, and we created a print literate workforce with the cognitive communication skills to manage the complexities of coal and a steam-driven first industrial revolution. Without those communication skills, it would have been impossible to organize the first industrial revolution. You couldn't do it with an illiterate workforce. And consciousness shifted from theological to ideological consciousness. The Enlightenment, the Romantic reaction. And empathic distress moved to a new fictional family, national loyalty. All of a sudden, there's something called the United Kingdom. It's a mythology. And then a France, Germany. These are fictions. Now all French people think they have a common history, even though there were 200 languages in France 2 centuries earlier. But now they think we're French, and we have common ceremonies, commemorations. We create historical events. All French people kiss each other on the face, but they don't kiss the Germans. The Germans empathize with each other, but they're not going to have anything to do with the Italians except if they want a vacation there in the summer. All right? The funniest thing were the Italians. I don't know if we have anybody from Italy? So when you know the first prime minister of Piedmont said, now that we've created Italy, how the hell are we going to create Italians? And we've still been struggling with that. You know, if you're from Genoa, you're from Genoa, not from Naples. In the 20th century, we had a new convergence of communication energy, centralized electricity, and the telephone is crucial. Then later, radio and television became the communication media to manage and market a more dispersed oil era and a mass consumer society. That second industrial revolution, the energies are sunsetting. Coal, oil, gas, nuclear power. They're not sunrise. Prices are going up. The technologies based on those energies, like the internal combustion engine, have exhausted their S-curve. The whole infrastructure of this civilization, based on carbon, to which you do your work, it's all on life support. How do you maintain a carbon-based infrastructure for your buildings? We are on the cusp of a new convergence of communication energy, a third industrial revolution that could shift us to biosphere consciousness. We've had mythological consciousness, theological, ideological. In the 20th century, second industrial revolution, we went to psychological consciousness. Grandma couldn't think therapeutically. Everyone in this room, you think psychologically. Can we go from mythological, theological, ideological, psychological, can we shift beyond that to a larger fictional family? From blood ties to religious affiliation to national loyalty, why will we stop now? Is it possible to extend the boundaries of the human fiction so we empathize with the human race as our extended family and our fellow creatures as part of our evolutionary family? And the new border becomes the biosphere as our community. Why would we stop here? Now let me say, what I've outlined here, I outlined in the empathic civilization. This isn't linear. There are dark periods, blowbacks, huge downsides to history. But there is a scattered evolution within this of moving from mythological to theological to ideological to psychological consciousness. and extending the social glue, empathy, from blood ties to religious ties to national loyalties, that's hopeful, with all the blowbacks. The third industrial revolution could get us to biosphere consciousness. And let me say that all of these changes that I'm talking about change habitat patterns. Forage and hunters had migratory temporary habitats. The first hydraulic civilizations created the first urban settlements. In the 19th century, when we went to fossil fuels and stored sun, architecture went vertical, and we created very dense vertical urban environments, and the first major cities over 1 million since ancient Rome. In the second industrial revolution, we moved to suburban extended habitats with the autoculture. You with me? So what would the habitat look like in this new revolution? We're on the cusp of a new convergence of communication energy. The internet. The internet's a powerful new communication tool the last 15 years. This is not like the communication I grew up on. I grew up on centralized communication, electricity, radio, television, top-down, one-to-many communication. Centralized. What's so interesting about the internet is it's distinguished because it's distributed and collaborative, not top-down and centralized. So now, 2.3 billion people can take one of these little utensils or a little desktop computer in the palm of your hand and send your own video, audio, and text to all the other 2 billion people at the same time, at the speed of light, with far more distributed and collaborative power in social networks than all of the centralized television and radio networks of the 20th century. We did this in 20 years. Tell me we're not a social creature. If we were really autonomous and pleasure-seeking and wanted to be an island to ourselves, why do we have all these periods in history where we try to communicate in more social forms and extend the human boundary? This internet revolution, which is distributed and collaborative, is now converging in the last 24 months with a new energy regime that by its nature is distributed energy and takes form in a collaborative fashion. So when the internet begins to organize distributed energies, we have a powerful third industrial revolution, a change in temporal spatial orientation, biosphere consciousness, and change the whole way we conceptualize architecture and our planned environments. What are distributed energies? Well, let me compare them to elite energies. Coal, oil, gas, uranium, they are elite. Because when you go home tonight, the good chance is they're not in your backyard. They're only found in certain spaces in the world. They require huge military investments to secure them, huge military and geopolitical investments to manage them, and massive amounts of capital to organize them top down. And let me be very pointed here. Fossil fuels and nuclear power are the most centralized top-down energy regimes in all of history. And they're sunsetting. What are distributed energies? They're energies found in your backyard when you go home tonight. The sun shines all over the world every day. The wind blows across this beautiful little planet every single day. Everywhere we tread, there's a hot geothermal core of energy, heat, underneath this earth. In the rural areas, all that agricultural and forestry waste can be culled at a moment's notice back into energy. Wherever we have small hydro, we can convert it back to electricity. If you live on the urban coastal areas, the ocean tides and waves are coming in every day for energy. Wherever we have sewage, we can convert it in bioconverters back to energy. We have enough energy bathing this planet to provide for our little species until kingdom comes. The European Union has committed itself to a 5-pillar infrastructure for a third industrial revolution. I was privileged to develop the plan. It was endorsed by the European Parliament in 2007. It's working its way through the European Commission now and in the member states. And I should say Germany is leading the way. I was with the Chancellor last month. I've been advising her since she came in. We rolled this out in Germany on September 20th. Germany is, just as it helped lead the second industrial revolution by developing the internal combustion engine and the Autobahn. Good idea, wrong government in place at the time. But Germany is leading us into this third industrial revolution, which I'll outline. Pillar 1. The European Union has made a commitment to 20% renewable energy by 2020. This is not a suggestion. This is a mandate. Every community has to fulfill this goal. That's a third of the electricity has to be green across the 27 member states. 9 years to go. Pillar 2. Here's where you come in. How do we collect this green energy? Now, our first thought was interesting. Well, this is interesting. Let's go to the Mediterranean. They got a lot of sun. We'll put in these big solar parks in Spain, Greece, and Italy, and then we'll ship it on a high voltage line to Europe. The Irish have a lot of wind. The Norwegians have the hydro. Centralize it, ship it. Now, none of us oppose more concentrated use of these energies. These energies are distributed. The sun is found everywhere, but you can concentrate it. None of us oppose more concentrated solar parks or wind parks or geothermal parks and some hydro. They're essential to get us off carbon. They're transitional, but they are not the third industrial revolution. They're just a tiny part of it. There is no way to run a global economy on centralized solar, wind, and geothermal. You can't do it. It can't be done. So this got us to thinking a few years ago in Brussels, if renewable energies are distributed and they're found in some frequency or proportion in every square inch in the world, why in heaven's name are we only trying to collect them in a few central points? This is 20th century thinking based on fossil fuels that are elite, and therefore you have to centralize them. So buildings are pillar 2. It took us 20 years to get to this. Buildings. The number one use of energy in the world is buildings. The number one cause of climate change is buildings. By the way, parenthetically, does anyone know what the number 2 cause of climate change is, industrial induced, after buildings? Beef production and consumption related to animal husbandry. The reason I say that is not one government leader in the world has had one sentence on the number 2 cause of climate change. Even Al Gore won't talk about it as an old friend. How serious are we here? Number 3 is transport. Number 1 is buildings, and here's the goal. To convert every single existing building, because 70% of the building stock here is still going to be here in 2030. The goal is to convert every single building in the European Union, 191 million buildings, to your own personal green power plant. To collect solar off the roof, wind off the wall, geothermal heat under the ground, garbage converted back to energy, the works. The new buildings, they're already up, are zero emission and positive power. Acciona's in my group. Mr. Andre Canales has a zero emission building in Navarra. Olivia Bouygues is in my group. Bouygues has a new positive power office complex, drop dead gorgeous in the Paris suburbs, came up 2 months ago. Creates more power than it actually needs, sends back to the grid. Pillar 2 jumpstarts the economy because it'll generate millions and millions and millions of jobs to convert the entire infrastructure and building stock of Europe and the world over 40 years to your own power plants. Thousands of business opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises. That's a 40-year plan and then a 40-year multiplier effect. Remember, when we change our energy communication matrix, we change buildings. The buildings from here on are dual purpose. They're not just habitats, they're power plants. Think 1970, mainframe computers controlled by a few companies. Then think Steve Jobs, personal computer, and all the innovators of that generation create the internet. Now everyone has their own personal computer. You create your own information. Think centralized energy and power today. Think 25 years from now, everyone's going to create their own power. And the technology is moving on the same curve as the desktop computer and cell phones, the same cost curve, meaning the scaffolding for solar and wind and geothermal, all of those technologies are getting cheaper and cheaper. Moore's law is setting in now with wind. And they're going to get so cheap, they're going to be so cheap, they're going to give them away and you'll buy the service. Just like cell phones are so cheap, you get the cell phone, you buy the service. And as the technologies adapt and get cheaper, the sun is free. Once you have the technology to grab it, the wind is free. Once you have the technology to get it. The heat under your ground is free. The garbage you collect is free. Just as it create more information and the new technology, the internet, make it cheaper and cheaper on the transaction costs, green energy is going to follow the same line. Cheaper and cheaper, so it'll be as cheap as information. It doesn't depreciate as you share it. It actually appreciates in value, which we'll get into. So pillar 1, 20% green energy. Pillar 2, the architects of the world are going to redefine buildings as power plants. And we're going to jumpstart the economy. And that's already started in Germany. Any Germans here? As you know, all over Germany, Germany's leading in converting buildings into power plants, homes, offices, and factories. Pillar 3, this is the tough one. Storage. The wind isn't always blowing, and sometimes it's blowing at night, and we need the electricity during the day. The sun isn't always shining, or sometimes you have too much and then you don't have enough, and you have surges and lulls in the power grid. These are intermittent energies. We have to find a way to store them so that we can have a reliable load of energy. I'm for any kind of storage technology, flywheels, batteries, capacitors, water pumping in Norway and those countries that have it. Use them all. But we're putting most of our emphasis at the center of the storage network on hydrogen. We want all of them. But hydrogen is the basic element of the universe. It's the lightest element. It's what we're made out of. It's the stuff of the stars. And it's modular. Hydrogen technology allows us to modular use of it so you can put it in a little home or flat or in a big utility company. So when the sun hits your roof on your factory or home, you generate electricity, photovoltaics. If you have some surplus electricity you're not using, put it in water. Remember high school chemistry? You slept through this course. You don't have a clue as to what I'm saying. High school chemistry, you put the anode and cathode in the water, and the hydrogen comes out in the tank, right? They still do this, right? And then when the sun isn't shining on the roof, you put that hydrogen and convert it back to electricity. A small thermodynamic loss compared to converting fossil fuels and nuclear from wellhead all the way to us. Pillar 4 is where the internet revolution converges with the communication, the energy regime, green energy, to create a nervous system for this infrastructure. We use off-the-shelf internet technology. We take the transmission and power grid of Europe and the world and we convert it into an energy internet that acts exactly like the internet. So when millions and millions of buildings are collecting just a little bit of their own energy, storing it in hydrogen like you store media in digital, then if you don't need some of that electricity and someone else down the road needs it, your software can program it across the energy internet so you can share your energy from the Irish Sea to the doorsteps of Russia. Just like you and I now create our own information, store it in digital, share it online. Germany is testing the energy internet in 3 major regions of Germany tonight. Pillar 5, that's electric transport, fuel cell transport. Electric vehicles came out this year. Fuel cell cars, buses, and trucks in 2014. You'll be able to plug in anywhere to the grid, get green electricity from the buildings, then anywhere you travel, plug back to the grid, and either get green electricity or sell back. For example, let's say you're here at the school and your car's out there illegally parked here in London. And you program the software, the car's doing nothing. At a certain time of day, the electricity price goes up in London. Your software will kick in and say, time to sell my electricity back to the grid. You're making money while you're sitting here in class. Not bad. These 5 pillars together are the new mega technology platform. They are the nervous system and infrastructure for an economic paradigm that will mature in the first 40 years and will have a multiplier effect in the remaining part of this century. Separately, they're only components. They're not technologies. If you let one pillar get ahead of the other pillar, or they stand alone as isolated pilots, you lose the whole project. It's the synergies between the pillars that connects them. So you have to think that way as architects and urban planners. You're not just creating buildings, you're creating nodes. The buildings are part of the 5-pillar nodes. Architects in the future will think nodally about creating the entire infrastructure. I'll show you why, just from a mistake we made in Europe. We realized this last year. Last year, the European Commission leaked a document saying, uh-oh, trouble. We need €1 trillion now for the energy internet between now and 2020. Why? We put in feed-in tariffs all over Europe. You know what those are? Your electricity bill goes up slightly in your country. You don't even notice it. But then there's a pool of money so that if an early adopter wants to convert their building to the new green energy, they get premium price for sending their energy back to the grid. So the feed-in tariffs have been so successful that thousands and thousands of sources around Europe are trying to get their green energy back to a grid that was never designed to be 2 directions. It's servomechanical, it's single-directed, it's leaking it's like an old person, leaking 20% of its electricity across the grid. It's disgraceful. So we can't get all that energy into the grid. Then we realize, uh-oh, not just this pillar on the grid, but now we have a problem with the feed-in tariffs because of storage. Because some of our regions in Europe are 20, 30, 40, 60% green energy, as you know, Enric, Navarra and Aragon, Spain are 70% green electricity, and we're losing 3 out of 4 kilowatts because we're not storing it. So we're losing the wind and we're losing the sun. You can't invest in losing 3 out of 4 kilowatts. Then we realized, we didn't incentivize the little guys in Pillar 2. So the big companies in my group, with those feed-in tariffs, are building big solar and wind parks. But what about a small and medium-sized enterprise or a homeowner? How do they afford 30,000 euros for a photovoltaic power plant? Finally, the banks in Germany and Italy now have realized there's money here to be made, and they're putting out green loans for the little guy. So if you're in Italy, and this is amazing, where's my Italian here again? You'll be amazed at this. It's a pretty bureaucratic country. I love Italy. You know, I'm there all the time. I was there last week. But if you sign a loan with a startup company, they're advertising on TV and they have all the banks, you get a photovoltaic on your roof, 30,000 euros worth in 60 days. And the banks are willing to do this because they look at your electricity bill and they can actually see how much you're going to save each month, so they know you're going to pay back. It's a no-brainer, as they say. All right? Then we realized if we don't incentivize the other 4 pillars, how do we plug in our transport? Daimler and GM in my group, and they're scared to death. They got these new vehicles coming out, but they have no way to plug them in the infrastructure. This is where President Obama made his mistake. He wanted a green economy. He's poured billions of our tax money into it on standalone projects. Battery factory here, car place over there. He didn't connect the dots. He didn't understand communication energy coming together, and you need a 5-pillar infrastructure, a nervous system, and it comes in nodally. This is power to the people. This is the democratization of energy. This makes everyone an entrepreneur. And this shifts us to lateral power. And that's going to be a key concept in the architecture of the future. It's not only architecture that's distributed and collaborative, but it's architecture that actually resonates lateral power, which sounds like an oxymoron. Because we've thought of power as pyramidically, from the pyramids, our oldest architectural monuments, all the way to the skyscrapers today in Shanghai. That represents power, top-down, centralized. But on the internet, power is organized, distributed, and collaborative, when millions and millions of small players come together and connect. The lateral power exceeds anything you get from centralized power. It's a mindset change. It's a game changer. It changes the economics. It changes the political landscape. It changes society. And that's what the October 15th movement and the Occupy Wall Street movement intuitively is about, even if they maybe don't recognize it. They know there's something wrong with the system in which businesses are centralized, government is unresponsive, and we now face climate change. The music companies, they did not understand file sharing in music. You know, all the cheaters are in the room here. You're all the guilty parties. When this first started happening, the music companies said, this is a joke. Millions of people, they got nothing to do after school, these kids, but figure out software to share this music. All right. Then they got worried. Then they went out of business, the music companies. Because when millions of young people found software to work on getting this distributed, you can't beat millions of kids doing this. Apparently they have nothing else to do after school. All right? They're not going outdoors anymore. The newspapers didn't understand the distributed power of the blogosphere. Millions of people sharing knowledge, sharing information on social spaces. Now the newspapers are going out of business or creating blogs. Encyclopedia Britannica couldn't fathom Wikipedia. And Bill Gates couldn't understand Linux. These are distributed models. They create lateral power. That's a revolution. This creates biosphere consciousness. And that is, up until the industrial age, we were totally entrained to the rhythms of the planet. You know, every organism has myriad biological clocks that entrain us to the solar day, the lunar month, and the seasonal cycles. When you have jet lag, you understand this. We're all actually temporally entrained, as well as spatially oriented, to the planet's biospheric rhythms. And we had to move with those rhythms because as forager hunters in agriculture, we had to be on top of this every day. When we went to stored sun in the first industrial revolution and we discovered these chunks of coal and this liquid oil and gas, we thought, okay, and we no longer have to be in touch with the rhythms. We can hermetically seal ourselves off, and all of our architecture and urban planning represented this, and we create these isolated bubbles removed from nature. Now we're realizing that's an illusion. When we go back to stewarding the renewable energies that bathe the Earth, each day in our software, we're monitoring the solar radiance hour by hour. In Germany, they're testing how the radiance will know hour to hour and be able to project 6 hours from now the solar radiance. And you'll have it right on your dial. And you'll know the wind velocity shifts hour to hour and 6 hours ahead, 12 hours ahead. And you'll be able to monitor the geothermal heat changes in the various seasons of the year and how your garbage is digesting given what's in there. So we become more embedded in our buildings in the rhythms and flows of the biosphere to which we attend. That's biosphere consciousness. And we are beginning to reconceptualize architecture, and Enric has been very much a part of our central team. We've got 120 companies. We've got 50 architectural firms, our urban planning firms, the best in the business. Enric, Gordon Gill, Adrian Smith out of Chicago, Peter Head out of London, Tom Maines in Los Angeles, a lot of good folks. We are reconceptualizing our urban areas as biosphere nodes and the infrastructure as empathic to all of the rhythms and flows in the surrounding environment. So when we did the Rome plan for the mayor of Rome, this is one of many plans we've done in the last 2 years, we reconceptualized all of Rome as a biosphere node, the urban area, the commercial core, and the outer rural region, which is 60% of Rome. So that it all is transparent, interactive, and we're responsible for making that biosphere nodal. So it's self-sufficient in maintaining its own part of the biosphere. The way this third industrial revolution comes in is very interesting architecturally. The first and second industrial revolution scaled vertically because of elite energies, and you had to put a lot of money into capital in order to finance these energies. So all the businesses that scale off that energy had to be centralized factories, dense urban environments, and then suburban environments for the auto era, centralized logistics, etc. Top down. Third industrial revolution likes to run uninhibited across land masses till it reaches the ocean edge. And it's going to come in like Wi-Fi. As each metropolitan area and each region begins to develop these 5 pillars, they create a node. And then the node wants to immediately connect to the next node and the next node so you can share the lulls and the deficits and the surges and the lapses with each other, just like Wi-Fi. So you want to connect node to node to node until you reach across the continent. Each node is part of the biosphere. Together, the nodes connected in not a social space, but a biosphere space. The next stage of globalization is continentalization. Continental markets. Third industrial revolution favors infrastructure that crosses continents till it reaches the oceans. The EU is the first continental market. It's now got to complete its mission, and it also favors continental political unions to organize it. The EU is the first continental union. It's networked, it's not hierarchical. So it's a little bit frustrating because you have to wait for everyone to come on board, but that's a network. The Asian Union is forming, and an Asian Union is creating a continental market across Asia right now, and a new third industrial revolution energy infrastructure has emerged in the last 24 months. The African Union was stumbling until 2 years ago. Now it's joined with the EU in a partnership, and now the African Union is intent on a continental market and putting in third industrial revolution infrastructure, last 24 months. The South American Union, anyone from South America here? The South American Union was formed 2 years ago, just starting. There's now talk about continental markets from Mexico to Chile and a continental political union. This globalization makes sense because it's bottom-bottom. You start at the locality, the nodes connect to the regions, they connect up across continents, and then we are responsible for the biospheres of the Earth. Unless we think this is too academic, the kids are already there. Go to any grade school in London, and this is true around the world. This happened in 5 years. 10-year-old kids are coming home. 10-year-old kids, and they're saying to mom and dad, hey, Mom, why is that TV on mode in that room? We're not using that television. Why do we have such a big car? Where'd the hamburger come from on my plate? Where were my clothes grown? They're driving their parents crazy. They're learning systemic thinking in a school system that was based on centralized, reductionist, authoritarian models of learning. This is informal because if we'd ever introduced this into the curriculum formally, it would have probably been knocked out. Teachers are just teaching this. And they're learning to connect the dots, which is what biosphere consciousness is about. So the hamburger, the kid comes home and says, where'd that hamburger come from? Did it come from a central rainforest in Central America? Did they have to knock down the trees for the soil base, for the 3 years of soil for the cattle? And when they raised those trees, what happened to those rare species of animals that use the tree canopy for their survival? They go extinct. And when they raise the trees, there's not a carbon sink for the industrial and base carbon to absorb into the trees. That means the temperature goes up. That means that some farmer 8,000 miles away, some other part of the planet, has more floods and droughts and can't raise enough food to provide for his family because of the hamburger on the bun in my table. That's connecting the dots. The kids are learning that every single thing they do, even when they're asleep and awake, has an ecological footprint that affects the well-being of some other family or some other creature in some other part of the biosphere. That's systemic thinking. That's a revolution. Last chapter of my book is, second to last chapter, is on all of that. So, how do we get there? The third industrial revolution is a practical plan. They're saying utopia. As my wife said, it took all you guys 20 years, you men and women, to think this up. We know we have to go to, you know my wife, we know we have to go to renewable energies. We have to get off carbon. But then we have to collect them. How do you collect them? You have to collect them everywhere they exist. That's through the buildings. Otherwise, you can't run a global economy. But then pillar 3, we have to find a way to store them because they're intermittent energies. And then pillar 4, we have to share them across continents so that we can have enough load so when someone has a surge, someone else has a deficit, we share it. That's an energy internet. Then 5, we have to plug them into mobility so that we can maintain a society that's sustainable and our markets are post-carbon. If there's some other plan, step forward. This took us a long time, as you know, to get here. Now it's up to the architects to think systemically and holistically. It's not just about buildings, it's about how buildings become part of a nodal framework, a 5-pillar infrastructure that rethinks the way we live in civilization. We need to rewild the urban areas. We need to bring the urban areas together with the rural areas. We have to create biosphere consciousness through our architecture and planning so that people can be reacquainted with the rhythms of the earth and our fellow creatures. And we have to extend that empathic sensibility not only to our species but our fellow creatures so we can resonate with those temporal rhythms. Empathic architecture embedded in biosphere consciousness with a third industrial revolution infrastructure, it changes the world. So here I am at the oldest architecture school in the world with all the best and brightest. It's up to you. It really is really up to you. I'm going to tell you I don't know if this can be done. But I don't think there's an alternative. I don't know of any time in history where a generation has had to deal with these challenges. It's not just the end of an energy and communication era. We're now facing potential extinction, at least mass die-off of life. And that means between you and your children, you have to be on mission and focus and discipline to lay down this third industrial revolution vision and game plan, to establish biosphere consciousness, to reshape our educational institutions to create 3 generations that can think this way, and to change the business landscape and shift the lateral power. That is a big mission. If not you, who? So what I would urge all the architectural students here, get together with your colleagues in all the architectural schools in the world tomorrow morning on Facebook. I know you're connected. Start putting together these architectural schools. It's not about just efficiencies. Efficiency is essential in buildings. We can't do any of this without it, but we've got to move way beyond efficiencies. If it's just about efficient use of non-renewable energy, we're not going anywhere by itself. Efficiencies are critical. Retrofitting is critical. Get together with your colleagues around the world. Start a website. Get the architecture schools moving. Then join with the urban planning schools and the ecologists and the chemists and the biologists and begin a movement to reshape the thinking of this planet. Give you a last thought. Anybody here take their National Geographic DNA test? All right. You can go up on the National Geographic website and take this test. It costs you $100. They send you a bio kit. My wife and I and my in-laws did this. We take DNA out of our cheek, put it in the bio kit, send it back to the genetics laboratory at the National Geographic website. They analyze the DNA, send us back a map based on our DNA. They can tell us, based on our mutations, how we migrated all the way through the beginning of history, our family line. It's wild. But I'm going to save all of you hungry students because I know you pay a lot of money to go here and you're all broke. and you're going to spend 50 years paying this back. So I'm going to save you $100. They send you another statement, which is really pretty interesting. Apparently, I didn't know this, 175,000 years ago, there were about 10,000 anatomically modern humans walking the grasslands in Africa, all right? They located one woman. She's a fictional database line for genetics. They call her the mitochondrial DNA Eve. Apparently, her genes passed everyone in the room tonight. The other ladies didn't make it. She was pretty fertile. It gets even more strange. They locate one guy. He's a fictional data line for genetics. They call him the Y chromosome Adam. Apparently, his genes passed to everyone in the world. The other guys didn't make it. Here's the news. We all came from two people. The Bible got this one right. We could have come from many lineages, but what I'm pointing out here is that here we are fighting. We're in various levels of consciousness. We're in the trivialities of existence, and yet our species is in peril, our fellow creatures are at risk, and the planet now is in jeopardy. We've got to think as a human race. Consciousness changes quickly over history. When, up until the 14th century, for example, people never saw themselves. You know that? Grooming wasn't very good. Until in Murano off Venice, they started mass-producing reflective mirrors, and it became a pastime. Everybody starts looking at themselves for the first time in history. Hey, wow, that's me. Then that's you. What's interesting about the consciousness shift is all of a sudden, people get a very clear idea that they have a very unique identity that's different than someone else's identity. And that other person's identity, however, is similar to mine, but unique. It allowed us self-reflection. That's what mirrors do, reflect. That's why we call it self-reflection. So with mirrors, we begin to interiorize ourselves, develop a greater sense of personal selfhood, but also begin to empathize with other humans and other creatures, especially the mammals who look like us, and it extended the empathic drive. In 1970, was it? 69 to 70, when Apollo made its last shift around the dark side of the moon, our astronauts, and our guys come out and they see the sun shining on the Earth from the moon, and they clicked a few amateur photos. My generation put them on the walls. We saw the Earth from the moon. It blew our minds. And the drugs helped a little while we were looking at the posters, but it really blew our minds. But today, you do this every day. Consciousness shifts, and we're not aware of it. If you're Skyping with architecture students in another university or somewhere else in the world, say Tokyo, you meet a friend. You get that woman's address. After class, you take a Google map, you come down from outer space, you go right to that person's street, their neighborhood, their home, and you can see the whole thing. And so the consciousness is shifting with this technology. We can look from the top down, the outside in, the inside out, and we begin to realize we're all wrapped in one biosphere. That's a cognitive temporal spatial shift. It's part of biosphere consciousness. So what I hope, do this. You're very privileged. You're in a great institution with a tremendous history. Now take this opportunity. Organize your professional life so that it has a mission. It's going to be up to the architects to work with the engineers and the biologists and the urban planners and the other disciplines to move all of this forward. So what I would say is stay on two tracks. Stay disciplined here at the architecture school to create the new models, to create these nodes. Parallel track, start organizing with your fellow architectural students all over the world. Create a movement so that we can move post-carbon, knock the temperature down on the planet, bring our species together, re-embed ourselves with our fellow creatures as part of our extended family, save this planet for future generations to enjoy. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Terrific. I keep listening to your words, and I met you 3 years ago, and he was talking about power plants and building as power plants, and this is one of the buildings we just finished in Barcelona. It's a zero emission building, and you talk about it like a breathing organism, like a skin that breathes and so on. And recently this building has been awarded last Friday, whatever that means, World Best Building 2011 by the World Architecture Festival. But so it's happening. Join the movement because it's happening. First of all, I want to thank you. I'm going to do 10 minutes of thank you, and then we go and see the project, okay, the performance. That's what really matters. But I have a first thank you to the unit tutors of the school, like Charles and Marco and Claudia, who are sharing knowledge. This school is opening up. You have to know that it took me 2 years to hand Jeremy. It took me 2 years to hand you, to follow you, to get you. And now I'm sharing you here in the school with other units. I think that's kind of the sharing and the network and the notes we were just talking about. You know, I went to San Sebastian to your lecture. You were doing this lecture in San Sebastian three years ago. And we had a private meeting just before that. He said to me, look, I just got these 9 pages of the New York Times you just published. And I was like, yeah, these things happen. And he said, but how old are you? And I said, 40, I was 39. I said, 40. And he said, pretty young guy to have 9 pages at the New York Times. That was his reaction. So you guys are young people here and young minds, but it's happening. Seriously, it's happening. It's happening. So the world is watching and the world is making it happen. Just shortly. So this is our young Deep 18, and they're working as a team, as a collaborative. These are meetings. It's getting a consciousness. You see, it's getting this idea that Jeremy talks. This is our first meeting with students. Conrad has been doing this idea of scanning the building using different softwares. These are the bad news. This building is category D in terms of energy as a certificate. And we asked the school to give us their power invoice, but we didn't get it, so it's not possible, it's not official. But we got some numbers. So this building consumes energy like 2 Covent Gardens. Wild. These are the numbers, 900 kilowatts. So continuing with the research on what Maya and particles and software can do, this is what Nora is achieving, this idea of time. So the 4 pillars, which I heard today there's 5 pillars, right?
Well, we made transport a separate pillar.
As a fifth pillar. So what you will see is this idea of 4 pillars developed in the building today. This is the work of Zach. The bad news is that all this oil which is happening, this is the big drama. So you will see what the consumption of energy of the school is performing. You will also see that the building is sick. You will see all this energy loose to the outside. But there are good news. Good news is pillar 1, clean energy. These are wind maps over the building. And these are testing in the school, in the laboratory, in the black room upstairs. To achieve this energy regime, this third industrial revolution, we need heroes. And this is Marga, Marta, and Victor coming all the way from Barcelona with a van full of projectors and technology to do this. The budget in London was £18,000, £12,000, £10,000. You know, you get a van, just do it, just do it. And these are the heroes arriving last Saturday. the school. That's kind of the attitude, okay? This school has a very powerhouse, which is people like Roberta, Belinda, and the staff. So give them an applause because it was hard. It was hard. At some point, they were trying to stop the project or support the project. You know, these moments of, let's do it. So that's happening, and Juliana, she's a master in the time and in the engine machine. She's a positive virus. And this is me pretending I'm helping. And this is the big energy attack at the school, at the EA. This is the penetration of the technology into the school. That's the attack. And this is what's needed. Attack, action, public work, public action. Technology to the people, as Jeremy says, democracy to the people, this idea of energy, of layout. And the good news, the wind map is here. We can collect it using wind turbines developed by people like Tata and others together as a collaborative team. I'm not going to explain much, that's a surprise for later on, but the grid of water is producing a second skin that produces green, vertical ground, and now that's the moment of replace this into what you will see outside. So it's very much the moment to act, to get to there. Thank yous also to the mother of Leila to come from Paris. She came from Paris to see this, so this is it. Look, guys, seriously, this is a very big thank you to the unit, to the students, to the tutors, but among all to Jeremy, to your vision, to your push. It's happening, and it's a seed. We will have the support of the Santander Bank into this project. We're working with Bureau Happel on the engineering, on the layout of this retrofitting project, and it's going to be a work of the students with different units together sharing knowledge. Third Industrial Revolution. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Please join us. Join us. So let's see you all outside, please.